You are listening to the Bravo Creative Podcast, hosted by Tom Baker. Thank you for listening. Your position has been triangulated. Drone army has been dispatched to your location. Commencing attack run in 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to the Bravo Creative Podcast, and thank you so very much for listening. The Bravo Creative Podcast is being delivered to you by way of all of your favorite podcast platforms, and it's linked directly from the www.bravocreative.net/Bravo Podcast page. Visit the Bravo Creative Podcast Facebook page and like and subscribe and share. And I really appreciate all the great feedback I'm getting. And I want to give a shout out to a few people today that have been super duper supportive over the course of this podcast. First off, I want to thank the very talented and fun Brittany Greer for sharing the Bravo Creative Podcast. She is a true follower, and I really appreciate your support of the podcast. I love you. I'd also like to give a shout out to my good friend James Heron. He's the first one to get out there and like the podcast as soon as it's posted, and it warms my heart just knowing that he's out there. And also Jason Lee Knight, the lone samurai wandering the cinematic wasteland of action, horror, and all of the genres in between. Jason, thank you for sharing out the podcast. I really, really appreciate it. And just your Facebook description alone, I want to have you on the show. So hit me up. Today's podcast is sponsored by instant gratification. This is such a horrible sponsor in today's age of Facebook and Twitter and Twitch and all those other social media platforms. We want to create something quickly without the excellence attached to it. So we feed that little happiness monkey that's attached to our back so that it'll give us a little pat. And I can't tell you how many folks I've seen that start something, post that big project that they're working on, and then not get anywhere with it because they got to the point of the process that wasn't any fun and didn't give you that instant gratification. You got to push through it. You got to stick to it and forget today's sponsor. Instant gratification is short-lived. It's a lie. Don't do it. My guest today holds a very, very special place in my heart. In my eyes, he played a major part in the trajectory of my life in regards to theater and acting and really just about everything. He's been a great teacher. He's been a valued critic and a dear friend over the years, and he believed in me from the very beginning. He cast me in my first stage show, played opposite me in my first lead role, directed me several times, and that's just to further set the stage of how much I love him. He is the founder of Scene One Theater in Jefferson City, Missouri, and he's an accomplished and very beautiful writer, outstanding and inspiring performer, and I absolutely love our conversations together. And I want to welcome to the microphone Mr. Mark Wegman.
Wow. It's great to be here. Thank you for that introduction. It's very humbling.
You're very welcome. What's amazing about it is the other night, me and Michelle and the kids were sitting in the living room. We were talking, and we were talking about kind of how life will lead you in different ways if you're open for it and you're willing to try new things. Don't get so locked in. You know, you sit there and you look at what you wanted to be when you were, a kid, and then all of a sudden something else steps in your way and changes it. And I was telling him about how, I'd been in the military and I had my head focused on the fact that I was going to be in the military for a long time. And I came back home and I auditioned for a show, which was the show that you and Tracy were directing.
West Side Story.
Yeah. And why the heck did you cast me in it? Because it has been like a crazy ride since...
Sure has.
1994 is when that came out.
That's right. That was September of 94.
Yep. Yeah, and I had never done anything before. I had no idea what I was doing, and I got in and I just fell in love with it.
And you were one of the PRs, Puerto Ricans, right?
I was one of the Puerto Ricans, yeah. And then I got put in the front of the stage for the Mambo number.
Okay,
which I thought that was
I remember that.
That was like a highlight of my life. Yeah. So what you been doing, man?
Well, recovering from COVID, I guess, on many aspects of life, work, and of course theater.
Yeah.
You know, the theater, Scene One. It last year, let's see, we had a show in January of 2020 before COVID hit. Then we did do one during the summer when the numbers weren't too bad, the number of COVID cases. And then we had a show in September when cases were a little bit on the rise, but we had a show, you know, physically distanced, taking a lot of precautions. Attendance was not great, but that was expected. And then we had no shows from September until May of 2021. We came back with our first show, Barefoot in the Park. And people were glad to see Scene One back.
I bet.
Yeah.
I think I did one of the last shows here before COVID hit.
It was at the Musical of Musicals.
Musical of Musicals.
Yeah, that would have been, in, I think that was September of 2019. So, yeah, you know, one of the, 5 right before COVID hit.
Yeah, directed by the lovely Natalie Eichhoff.
Yes,
yeah.
And that show was very well attended and
that one was. We had
very popular.
We had a ton of people at that one. That was fun.
Yes.
I'm ready to do another one up here.
Hey, we'll take you.
All right, let me know.
Yeah, because
I'm ready to road trip a little bit and do some theater.
We'll have you. You gave that wonderful introduction about me, and right back at you. I mean, working with you side by side as an actor and also directing you over the years has taught me many things. You are one heck of an actor, who does his homework. And you're very inspiring. I mean, and when you're in a role, you always bring something to the plate, that I as a director wouldn't always think of, And that's the great part of that creative process. I give you something as a director, then you take it, and then I learn from your inspiration and your focus and intensity. So right back at you. You're one of my favorites.
I learned a lot of that from you. I learned a lot of that. I remember when we did West Side Story, like my first introduction to it. I mean, we had some really, really talented people in that cast. I mean, it's community theater.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, come on, it's not Broadway. It's not the traveling show. It was community theater here in Jeff City. And so I think you go into it going, oh, well, this will be fun. And you don't really, it kind of sneaks up on you and it rope-a-dopes you and you go, wow, I really learned something. And I became inspired and I figured out how to do some of just those little exercises, like learning how to do your homework, learning how to get into a character and delve into it. And that was a lot of what I attribute, especially you early on working on shows, is you were very open to that and kind of gave us the template of how to do it. And that it made it more rewarding for me as a performer. And I really appreciate it. I love it.
Well, yeah. And that quality you're talking about, I mean, I really feel the shows in Jefferson City, it's like you said, it's not Broadway, it's not whatever, but people who attend, they're like, well, it's just as good.
We take it seriously.
We do. And people aren't just doing it to have fun. They're doing it to do it well, to learn the craft and to have discipline.
And, one of the other benefits, because one of the things I said in the opening was that you were a welcomed critic. And that is something that was very essential doing theater in this town, was that we had some really good critics and they knew how to give you a critique on something that was going to move you further. It wasn't necessarily going to shut you down. It wasn't going to pull you back. Now, we did have some. We did have some critics that would come up and they would just shut you down. But the people that you really respected, they would come up and they would give you a really good criticism. And they go, well, you know what, you might want to try this next time. Or what were you thinking there? Asking those why questions. And I think it made a difference in a lot of us. We cultivated a lot of really good performers in this area back then.
That's true.
And we had a lot of good examples. I mean, folks, I'll just tell you this. There are performances that Mark Wegman has done that I have seen that I would put up with anybody else that I've ever seen on a professional stage. And I can still see that performance in my head. That's how impactful it was.
Really? Wow.
And a couple of times it's because we were on the same stage together, and you see it, and you're like, wow.
You got the front row seat to your fellow actor.
And then I'm like, great. Now I got to step up. So we've had millions of conversations over the course of the last, 27 years or whatever. But how did you get into this? How did you get into performance? What was it that got you going at it?
The fact that I sucked at sports. Okay, let's go back to grade school. That's pretty much the story. Being someone who also, all of a sudden at fifth grade, he starts struggling with a little bit of a weight gain. And so he decides in sixth grade to join his grade school's basketball team. Okay, look at me. Do I look like a basketball player?
You kind of do.
Oh, sure. I could play one, right? I can play one. It didn't go so well. I didn't like it. I've never been, my favorite sport, I went outside, growing up with Dad, and we played catch. And I could hit a baseball, but that was about the extent of it. Sports, I never really cared much for competing. You got to win, that kind of thing. So the basketball gig was not my thing. So I guess I just kind of wandered around aimlessly in seventh grade. And then in eighth grade, two teachers who changed my life, Julie Schell, who was married to Jim Schell, and he has a long-standing theater legacy that he left in Jefferson City. Both of them, and Nancy Hecklenberg, taught eighth grade, and they decided they were going to do a musical called You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. And I auditioned, and I got a lead. And all of a sudden, that was something I could do. And I did it well, and even all the jocks were like, Wegman found something he can do. They were all like right there with me. Hey, that's your gig. And it was great. I remember at the time we were going to have...
So you were cheered on by the popular kids, too.
Yes, I was. Yeah. Because, I think I did it pretty good. I think they were shocked,
Now, what part did you get in that?
Oh, it was kind of interesting. At the time, my good friend Dan, it was going to be double cast. It was going to be double cast, two different casts who would get to perform it each 2 or 3 times. And I really wanted to be Charlie Brown, and he wanted to be Snoopy, and we both got the 2 Linuses. So I was cast as Linus.
Really?
And so was my friend Dan Sweeney. Yeah. We were both Linus. And that's the first big part I ever played. Now, later in Jefferson City, as a fundraiser in the 2000s, I got to play Charlie Brown. Yeah, when B.B. Heil and Gail Bice directed You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. But I started as a Linus.
That's awesome.
So, yeah. And then, kind of took off from there. And we did... Jim and Julie Schell, were in town, and they did shows at the St. Joseph Cathedral School is where I went, and they did shows during the summer in the gym. And the summer after my 8th grade, it was West Side Story.
Oh, really?
I got introduced to and fell in love to West Side Story. I auditioned, and I was cast as Baby John.
Oh.
Baby John, one of the Jets. And we did that one summer. Another summer, we did Pippin. We did How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. And at the same time, I was auditioning for shows at Helias, where I went to high school. Was in all the musicals there and a few straight plays. We did a straight play every once in a while, and I was involved in those. And thought, I really like this. So then you graduate from high school, and you wonder if what you're gonna do. Am I going to pursue this as a living, college, whatever? So, excuse me, I attended, college at both Lincoln University and MU up in Columbia, taking some general ed classes, for a few years after I graduated. Nothing steady. I was also working, some jobs and stuff like that. But then finally I decided I'm going to get my theater performance degree at MU. And I just dove headfirst into the theater department up there at MU, and I thrived in the theater classes, but not the other classes so much. I always struggled with the infamous college algebra. and the college, biology with a lab, that kind of thing. And, I'm getting straight A's in the theater classes and stuff like that. And I'm struggling just to stay afloat in the other classes. And I'm just trying to make it all work. And then my dad dies when I'm up at MU. And that would have been December. He got sick, and he passed away rather quickly after finding out, after we found out he had cancer in December of 1990. And that really hit me hard. And that whole next year, I was cast in shows up at MU because I was going to school there. I was in the theater department. And then I also auditioned for summer repertory companies, the summer of 91. And I went to the Midwest Theater auditions in Kansas City. And it was great because about 5 different theaters were interested in me and wanted to hire me for that summer. Where you go and perform, and, they house you, you get room and board, and then they pay you a, modest salary every week. And but I chose Clinton, Iowa, the Clinton area Showboat Theater, and it's actually right up there on the Mississippi. Clinton is about 40 minutes north of Davenport, Iowa, and it's on the Mississippi. And they have had a gambling boat that went up and down, but they had a boat that was docked, and they had formed in there a theater in that showboat, and it never went anywhere. It stayed docked. It was partially on land, and that was their theater. And I got hired to perform there that summer, and was just doing theater like crazy. And then in the fall, I was going to go back to school at MU, and it was kind of interesting because all of a sudden I didn't have a show. I didn't have a show or a character to play. So that slightly, almost a year, not quite a year after my dad died, it really hit me. It really hit me hard.
So you didn't have anything to kind of consume yourself
right.
with.
And even though I was grieving, for my dad that whole time, like I was up in Clinton, Iowa, and I went through this process every day. You would rehearse. I was cast in, they did 6 shows that summer, and I was cast in 5 of them because everybody had one show off. And I would rehearse. You'd rehearse morning, noon, in the evening, or you'd be performing a show in the evening. You were always doing something. And then that night, I would break down and cry, and I'd call Mom, and we'd talk on the phone. And then I'd be up again the next morning, and I just did what. But then all of a sudden, when I found myself at one point that I didn't have a role, it's like I was hiding my grief in the roles I was playing, kind of. It hit me hard, and I just could not cope staying in. I just couldn't do it all. I couldn't continue trying to get the good grades in the algebra class and the biology, and so I came home. But of course I went on a path. Then I came home. I met my now wife, Tracy, and we've been married for 26 years. And so it's funny how, that path, had my dad not died, I might not be married to Tracy right now.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting. But
I probably wouldn't be married to my wife.
Well, there you go, because you wouldn't have been in West Side Story.
Wouldn't have been in West Side Story. Wouldn't have met her. And her and I had our, it's almost like in the I was telling the kids the other night, it's like Back to the Future. Mm-hmm. Like whenever, if George didn't dance with Marty's mom, then they never would have gotten at the, was it Under the Sea dance or whatever?
Under the Sea dance, yeah.
So I danced with Michelle for the first time at your wedding reception. Yeah. Because that's Mark had us all come back. So you proposed to Tracy the opening night of the show.
Yeah.
So opening night of West Side Story, Mark proposes to Tracy. She accepts, and then...
Thank God.
I know. 1 year later...
What kind of show would it have been if she had...
1 year later, the whole cast came back, and we sang Somewhere...
At our wedding.
At your wedding.
Yeah. I think all but 4 cast members could not make it, but everybody else was there.
And so we came back and we sang Somewhere, and then we went to the wedding reception that night, and that's when Michelle and I had our first dance.
So look at that.
I know.
And it's great. Here I still sit without a college degree, but
what was your dad's name?
Leroy L. Wegman.
Leroy, God bless you.
Yes. And he's still with me,
Oh, yeah.
You know how that works.
It's crazy.
But yeah, it is.
When did you decide that you were going to, because you were really active at the Little Theater of Jefferson City.
Oh, yeah.
You were very active in that for a number of years, either on the board or directing, or were you ever president over there?
No, I was like executive director, but I was never president.
So when did the idea first get into your head? What was it that got you thinking, I want to open up my own theater and do something a little different?
Well, and that's, it's a couple of different things. And, like you said, when I got out of high school and I was trying to decide what to do college-wise, I was working. I was doing little theater. I was performing with the Little Theater of Jefferson City. But then when I went to college and I took the amazing acting classes, that you hear so much about, and I also took playwriting class, which changed my life. I mean, that's where I fell in love with playwriting. So I had all this background and this love for theater, which I grew to love, back home and with doing shows with the Little Theater of Jefferson City. And then I go to college, you're involved in theater up there. And I always thought or hoped that if I never pursued it professionally, if I never went somewhere to become a professional actor, that I would want to start what you call a black box theater back in Jefferson City, because at the time, it would be unique to the area. We didn't have anything like that. And it would be partially a venue where people could perform things that they had written, original works, because I had written some original stuff, having taken playwriting and in college. I had stuff I wanted to perform, and it would be a place where we could perform those original works, but also other shows that would be avant-garde in nature that other theaters in town wouldn't necessarily do. And of course, when I did come back home, and Dad, had passed away, and I was here, I eventually started doing theater here again with the Little Theater and with Capital City Players until, I got the groundwork to start Scene 1 underway.
And for those that aren't from Jefferson City, so the Little Theater of Jefferson City started in about, what, early 70s?
Or late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah. And it was kind of the only name in town as far as theater, aside from the schools.
Yeah.
And then in the mid-80s, Rob Krause started, who was active in Little Theater as well.
Yeah, because I remember we had those musicals in the 80s that for the longest time, Wynn Riley did that fall musical. And I think her last one was, at least for that time period, she did The King and I in 1988. And then all of a sudden in 1989, this new guy, Rob Krause, was directing Carousel, I think it was.
Oh, okay.
And then he did Cabaret. So he did a few of those musicals at Little Theater.
And then Rob started the first dinner theater in Jefferson City. And it was usually just one show a year, right? When it first started out?
Yeah, when he did it at Ramada, they always did at least a show. I think he did one in January, because that was when the legislature came back and he wanted to do something entertainment for them, and he might have.
And it was
maybe
dark
he had
too.
another show.
It was dark as far as TLT wasn't. The Little Theater wasn't doing any shows.
Right,
at
not
that
in
time
January.
Yeah.
And at that time, he did at least one a year, and he might have thrown in like another one in maybe March, November, but it was at least one that he did every year, I think.
And Rob had a very bootstrap approach to the dinner theater over there. He put it together and made it work, and it worked out great for him. He had, I can't remember how many years he did Ramada over there. It was quite a while.
Yeah.
But then during that time, in the early 2000s, is when you started Scene 1.
Yeah. We first incorporated Scene 1 in 2002.
2002, yeah.
But we didn't have a home. And then at that same time, that's when they were renovating what is now the Miller Performing Arts Center. And Scene 1 didn't have a home, and that's when B.B. Heil and Gail Bice wanted to do a show that would be part fundraiser to put a little bit of money in Scene 1's bank account to grow on, to find a home, but then also dedicate some money to the effort for the Miller Performing Arts Center, because they were taking donations. You've gone there now and you see all the stars on the wall, people who donated. So it was sometime in between 2002 and 2004 that we did this production of Your Good Man, Charlie Brown, and then I finally found Scene 1 a home. Well, I guess in late 2004, beginning of 2005, which was the little space down on High Street below Carrie's Hallmark, and we had
Scene
our
1
first show.
version
Yeah.
Version 1.
Version 1.
Yeah.
And we did our first show in June of 2005.
What was that first show?
Psycho Beach Party.
I know. It was such a good show.
Yeah. And that show had actually been done. I wasn't in it, but it had been done when I was up at MU.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I was familiar with it. And I thought, I've opened up a theater that's going to do things that are a little bit different. So let's start with Psycho Beach Party.
Yeah. It was such a good show.
That was fun. And
I remember seeing that. In full transparency, you and I were kind of on the outs at that point.
Were we?
When that happened, yeah. We were not. We weren't like super talking to each other. We were like, "Hey, how's it going?" But we weren't super talking to each other.
What did you do? I mean, what did you do to make me mad? No, I'm just joking.
You know what it is, don't you?
I probably didn't cast you in a show. That's probably what it was.
Yeah,
No.
it was. Yeah, it's
Was
exactly
it?
what it was.
Oh
yeah.
my God, you have to refresh my memory. How could I not cast?
It was Robert Bridegroom. Remember that?
Oh, yes, I do remember the Robert Bridegroom. That was around the same time we did the Charlie Brown show.
Yeah. But anyways, feelings got hurt.
Yeah.
And that's, guys, this is what's funny about theater. is
Yes.
that it's a very emotional thing.
It is.
And people get very emotional about things, and don't take it personally.
Right.
And just move on past it.
Yeah, and you're passionate, and you think about, now that you're my age, you think about the days that you auditioned for the little theater of Jefferson City, like you said, the only game in town. They would do 4 shows a year, and a lot of them, 3 of them would usually be a straight play, which means non-musical for those who don't know, and limited parts.
Yeah.
And so your musical sometimes was the only chance to get a part all year. And you think of the times that you didn't get a part, so you stormed out of the little theater building because you just felt like you were wronged.
Well, and on the straight shows too, the bad thing with the straight shows, in my opinion, back then, were the straight shows were what the people that were very into doing theater did. Mm-hmm. The musicals were for like all the
and
the high schoolers,
right? And your Cantorum people would usually come and audition because they were musical.
But the straight shows, when they were doing the Neil Simons and all those, that was the shows when you go, oh, so that's where the good actors do their shows in Jefferson City, and it felt cliquish in a way. And so and I remember those days. I was like, man, I didn't get nothing. I didn't get nothing.
I know. Yeah, and I, just the way you're sitting here, teasing me a little bit, I've had many a conversation with the great Jack Renner over the number of times he did not cast me.
Oh, yeah.
At Little Theater. And I'm like, Jack, I auditioned for that. You did? Yeah. You don't even remember, do you?
Yeah.
And it's funny how that is so dramatic. Dramatic back then. And now we're like, But
you know what? And there is an art form to it. One of the things that I've talked about on the podcast so much is networking. You've got to get out and you got to meet people. And eventually you get out and you meet enough people, and one of those people is going to be a director of a show, and they're going to go, I'd really like to see you in this show. I can see your character in there. Because that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know how many times I've been sitting there doing something and I thought, that person would be great in that part. If I could cast all local people in that person would be great in that. And I've had you do it to me. Hey, I've got this part for you. I've had, Jack Renner call me up and go, Tom, I've got a great part for you. And it's just, it's kind of crazy how it happens, but it works.
It is. And speaking of that, I'll quiz you to see if you can remember. We're talking about Psycho Beach Party in 2005, and we're talking about the Robert Bridegroom, and you and I, we didn't see a lot of each other, as you said. Would you remember what happened in July of 2006?
Yeah, I did. That was your first show that you wrote, wasn't it?
Yes, Dependence Day.
And you cast me.
You were in that.
Yeah.
So thank you, because, it's one thing to direct a show.
And that was my first Scene 1 show.
Yes, it was. That would have been the second Scene 1 show. I mean, it's one thing you get a great joy out of directing a show, but then when it's something that you wrote, I mean, that's a whole different thing. And the fact that you and Gabe and Terry Schoonover and of course then myself did that show for me, to the show that I wrote, to be in that for me, I mean, I will always remember that and be thankful that you all did that. And it's kind of so funny because, when I first started Scene 1, people were like, I feel that our theater peers in town were kind of like, what is this going to be? I don't know. At this little room
Yeah.
down on High Street, we got to go see what this is about. And I cast myself as the character of Joe, Independence Day. I had to because, and of course he's older than what I was, because I asked like 13 guys.
Really?
Yeah, who like told me no. Now several of them had a conflict. It's summer, you know,
Right.
they're going out of town. But I think some of them just like I don't know what this scene one's going to be. I don't know this. It was still new, and they're like, who's going to see this? And you're doing it in this little room.
Yeah.
Like, what is that? So I think, and that's why the first season I directed and did just about everything because I felt like I was proving to everybody. You know, I had to prove to everybody this is a good product. Come join us.
And I'll just say this: but whenever I saw Psycho Beach Party, I knew right then and there, I was like, this is awesome.
Well, cool.
Because I'd never been exposed to a black box theater at that point. And so then all of a sudden you're like, you're that close to the audience? Are you kidding me? Mm-hmm. I mean, folks, we're talking black box on some of the shows that we've done. You're literally a foot away from the audience.
Yeah.
And one of the last podcasts that I had with Brad and Keith, we attribute, and I do attribute, film acting to the ability to get up in front of a an audience within 5 feet and be able to perform and stay in character and not listen to the or the Snickers or the wine bottles dropping all over the place or I think you know what show I'm talking about.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And it's always Saturday night, closing night's the worst for that.
Yeah, and that was the cool thing about the theater. It was kind of BYOB down there, and it was we had some pretty lively audiences.
Oh, we did.
It was fun. Do you still have pretty lively audiences? Well,
of course, since we're sitting here right now, of course it's carpet. So
we're
right
sitting in the theater, version 3.0.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, 3.0, which is in a state of transition. But I don't. We not like we did down on High Street, and maybe it was that small room that made it more noticeable.
I need to come back up here and do a couple shows.
I guess maybe the rowdy ones will come back.
They come back and see me.
Yeah, that's right. They would.
But I would have to say that some of my most memorable experience for me of theater was done in the scene 1.1. That was just like, folks, when we first started out, it was one room. There were how many chairs? About 50 chairs in the room.
Well, actually, our occupancy was between 50 and 60.
It depended on the
between
cast.
40 and 50 chairs usually is what we seated.
I remember we did a show called When You Coming Back, Red Ryder.
Yes.
And I had a cast of maybe about 8 people?
7 or 8, I think.
7 or 8 people. We literally had a room. The dressing room in the back was about 8 by 5. It felt that big.
Yeah.
And that's where we all got dressed.
Yes.
That's where we all got ready for the show. And then we would go in and perform. And it was, looking back, it was so much fun. We had such a blast. And the cool thing is you could tell when you were moving the audience. Like when the audience was in it, like you had flipped the switch, they were believing everything you were doing, and all of a sudden you could feel it. We had people walk out. They were so pissed off in that show.
Yeah, at your character.
At me, yeah. Which is easy because the character I played in, he was just horrible. But
Teddy,
yeah.
Yeah, and I will tell you that my wife and I, Tracy, we often, reminisce about many Scene 1 shows, and your performance in that is still what we think, Tracy and I, one of the best performances ever in Scene 1 history. Yes.
Well, I give it to you because that was a hard script to learn.
Yeah.
Number one.
It was a challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, but I give you what I give you, but then you take it and run with it, and it's some kind of magic.
We've had a lot of good shows, man. We've had a ton of good shows.
I know, and I think, remember Baby with the Bathwater?
Oh, my gosh.
And, when you direct the actors, you take into account the different experience levels of your actors. But then at one point I say, okay, Tommy, on page, this is an example because I can't remember page. On page 8, you start here. On page 16, you need to be here. Do something with the rest of it. And I knew you'd come up with something brilliant, and you did.
What?
I think you decided at one point just to sit on the couch and cross your legs, and you took off one shoe or something weird like that.
Oh, I made a sock puppet.
Yes, it was an absurd Christopher Durang play.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you had the license to get kind of wacky with it.
Stupid.
Without pulling focus away from other actors. So
Yeah, that's
good.
I learned that from you as well too.
Oh,
don't do that.
don't do that.
Well, real quick, I want to talk about your writing because, and I have had the privilege of doing, I think at least one show that you wrote, which was Dependence Day. When did you write that show?
Oh my gosh. Boy, I think I was probably writing it in 2002, 2003.
So when
I was trying to find a home for scene one.
So you knew you were going to get a theater, and so you were going, I want to have, so you were kind of
some material ready to go.
Yeah, getting some material ready.
Yeah, and what's so funny is about the creative writing process is, and this has happened to me a couple of times, is I was writing a different play. I was not writing Dependence Day. I was writing a play at that time, had a working title, but later became the play titled Mr. Steele, which we did at scene one later on. I was writing that, couldn't decide on the ending, and I'm like, I need a comedy that's kind of like this but different. So I sat down and just wrote Dependence Day like in one night, all except for the end.
Do you type it or handwrite it?
At that time, I would handwrite everything. I just found it more inspirational for some reason. Now I type, but I just hand wrote it. So then I had to go and type it, and I had everything except the ending. So it's like that's happened to me a couple of times where I'm writing one play, it inspires another one, and then the one that was inspired second goes further and happens first and before the one I was originally writing that inspired that second spinoff, if you will. Yeah.
Well, one of the shows that I absolutely love that you wrote is your Bookmobile show.
Yes.
And you've performed that one a couple of different times here, haven't you?
Oh, it's been like about 5 times now, I think, in different capacities.
So talk about that show.
The Day Smokey Died, Memoirs of a Mid-Mo Bookmobile Driver. Well, of course, I've now worked at Missouri River Regional Library here in Jefferson City since 2000. And I drive the Bookmobile. And when I first started driving the Bookmobile, I would drive to like these towns that I had heard about but had never been to, like, Bonnet. Well, I'd been to Bonnets Mill, but Bonnets Mill, Freeburg, Eugene, Henley. And I would come back and I would tell a story, to a coworker about a very colorful character that I had met on the Bookmobile. And I just started telling these characters, and they'd be like, "Oh my God, you got to tell so and so that story tomorrow." And I would tell these stories, and then at theater parties and gatherings, I'd tell a story, and they're like, "You got any more Bookmobile stories, about people you met?" And then I'd have another one, and then people kept saying, "You need to write a show. You need to write a show." So I thought, okay, I will. And then I had a conversation with my good friend Matt Morris, who plays the guitar and writes original music. And I'm like, there's 2 Bookmobile drivers. Matt, you're going to be my coworker, and you're going to be kind of like my Paul Schaefer. If I'm David Letterman, you're Paul Schaefer. And we're going to do a show. And so I wrote this show, worked on it a lot. It had many different versions. I would revise it. And it started out with the 2 of us. We sang a song, and I went through the steps of what you have to do to get your commercial B driver's license, studying the guide and just some shtick that I wrote. But it eventually led us to, we're licensed, now we go out and we visit all these wonderful people. And then I would assume the roles of the characters. And they were based on real life people that I met. And, I polled, the people. And I don't think any of them ever saw the show. But I would ask
how crazy is that to not know that you have a show about you?
I know. And it's funny, I think by the time we did the show, a lot of them had either moved away unfortunately passed away. But they gave me permission to write about their likeness. And, I changed their names all except for one lady. She's like, do not change my name. I want people to know what I think. And I want people to know it's me. And that's Clara Bouthot in Loose Creek. And so, and it just became this very, very funny, well-known, popular show that went over very well. And, of course, it's near and dear to my heart. And and I also, talked about in it, there was a whole segment. It was dedicated to my dad because I found myself as a bookmobile driver, driving all around the countryside in Cole and Osage counties to all these places that he had gone. Back in the day, he was a city boy, but he loved the rural area, and he was always finding a fishing hole. And some of these places he had taken me to, and I would recognize them as I was driving. I'm like, hey, that's where we went. And, places that he had talked about that I'd heard of that I'd never been to. So there's this whole dedication to him. And also, too, it was dedicated to the patrons because it was very important to me that the audience seeing this show knew that these patrons were not individuals that I was making fun of in any way or mimicking, but they were near and dear to my heart. And in taking them on and performing them or their likeness was a tribute to them. And they all had something very meaningful to say.
Yeah.
And
they gave you great stories.
What's that?
They gave you great stories.
Oh, they gave me wonderful stories. And of course, The Day Smokey Died, Memoirs of a Mid-Mo Bookmobile Driver, came from the first story that was told was a lady in Henley talking about her husband, Smokey. So that's where that came from. And the show was done as a fundraiser a couple of times, not just for Scene One, but for the Jefferson City Daycare and for the library one time. And the time Scene One was way behind on rent at Scene 1.2 on Capitol Avenue, because that happens. It's ebb and flow with the rent, and we needed a show. And Tracy's like, honey, the Bookmobile show. And I'm like, no, not again. She's like, yes, well, we did it and we made like 4 months rent. It's like, we caught up and then went further. So it's always been a huge hit, and people still ask me, when are you going to do it again? So, and I search for new material, and I have some, but I don't know, maybe it's me, but it seems like the people just aren't as colorful and as outrageous as they used to be. I don't know. Yeah.
They're all on their phones now.
Probably. and Clara Bouthot moved to Oklahoma, so yeah, she's not here.
But now you've got and you've had this for a while, and I've had the pleasure of being a part of it, but because you enjoy and appreciate writing so much, you've opened up Scene One multiple times, just about every year, to do a very awesome short attention span theater.
Yes.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, the first installment, let me just say, it's pretty much tradition nationwide. There are many theaters and many black box theaters in the nation who have evenings of short plays or evenings of 10-minute plays. I think it first became made famous by the Actors Theater of Louisville in Kentucky, I think. They're known for doing their 10-minute plays, and that really took off. So I'm like, we need to write some original 10-minute plays and perform them. And then we came up with the name Short Attention Span Theater, and we did our first installment of that in the spring of 2006 with Scene One, and we just did about 6 plays. People at that time, I made it known Scene One is for people who are writing original material. I don't want to be the only one writing. Other people need to write. So people started writing, and they submitted plays, and I think we did 6 10-minute plays that first installment. And then I think it was Mark Miles who brought to my attention that a theater somewhere, maybe in Indiana, was doing short plays, 10-minute plays, but with a theme. And he's like, they did a theme, and the theme was a shoe. And I'm like, a pair of shoes? He's like, no, just one shoe. I'm like, we got to do that. So the second installment was Short Attention Span Theater, The Shoe. So we went out and I bought all these pairs of shoes. I went to Goodwill or something like that. And then, of course, we hid one pair, one half of the shoe, one mate, I guess that's the right word. And we had all these shoes. We had like 9 individual shoes. Just a variety. I'm like, everybody pick a shoe and write about that shoe. And it's hard. Some people would include both shoes just because it's where it took them creatively. And they're like, oh, my God, I'm not following the rules. And I said, you know what? If you write a play that's awesome, we're not going to care. So
Right.
just, if you write something that's good, it's still going to be done. But a lot of them really stuck to just the one shoe. And then our next installment, and we haven't necessarily done it every year, but our next installment of Short Attention Span Theater was The Shoe. And I remember it was a January, but I can't remember what year. And we had people submit themes with the shoe, and we either did 6 or 8 that time. And so often now our next installment of Short Attention Span Theater will be our 13th installment.
Oh, wow.
And we have often had a theme. We had a shoe. We had
The picnic table.
we had the picnic table. And what happened there is someone donated a picnic table, and then we had a raffle, and then somebody got to win the picnic table, and then Scene 1 made some extra money.
We did a
with
show
the
together
raffle.
in that one.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that was Maslow's Ballet.
Maslow's Ballet, yeah.
Yes, we did.
That was a
And,
fun, that was a hard show.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, that was a hard show.
It was, and it was partially.
And if Keith Inlow writes it, it's never 10 minutes. It's usually 15 to 20 minutes. Yeah.
Right. And well,
rules.
and,
We don't need no stinking rules.
and
right?
and we've joked about that, and so much so where a lot of times, before Short Attention Span Theater, I'll get up and talk to the audience, and I usually like to let them know that Short Attention Span Theater is a great stomping ground for budding new playwrights, new directors, and actors. And I usually like to introduce those who are doing each of those crafts for the first time. And sometimes I'll find myself saying, it's Short Attention Span Theater, an evening of short plays, because
Right.
probably in the history of it, probably only 10% of the plays we've done have really been 10 minutes.
Oh, definitely,
Some
yeah.
some are 15, some might be 13, then you got 20 and 25. And
They're probably
and-
written as 10-minute plays,
Yeah.
but the emoting that goes on some
Right.
of them kind of has a tendency to.
yeah.
Actually, I think I did 2 that year because I did the notorious James
James
Bond.
Bond.
That was the first one, the first James Bond.
By Keenan McMahon.
Yeah, Keenan McMahon. That was his first foray into.
Well, no, his first, because before the picnic table, that was the 4th installment. We did the 3 doors. Remember the 3 doors?
Oh, and I directed his, which was the
Wrestlers,
the
right?
Wrestlers, yeah.
That was Keenan's first.
Okay, that was Keenan's first.
Yeah, and we just took the set and we just built 3 doors,
Mm-hmm.
and a couple people, had that was like 3 doors in an apartment building and stuff like that. And we had the 3 doors. We had those 6 boxes, the 6 black boxes. Those were theme.
Oh, the 3 poles.
The 3 poles, and
So explain the poles.
of course, being down in the basement on High Street, underneath Carrie's Hallmark, we had these 3 support beams that were in the middle of the room that were always in the way.
Of all of our performances.
Many of us hated them, but many of us grew to love them. And if you did theater in the round, they were definitely part of the show. So finally, we're like, let's make them part of the show and do Short Attention Span Theater, the 3 poles. And of course, the middle one was round. And
The other 2 were
like support beam. I don't know how to describe them.
they were like they were iron,
Yes.
like iron girder
Yeah.
looking things. Yeah.
So I remember that one time we even hung a phone inside one of those.
Yeah. Just about every type of show that you could do has been done down in Scene 1.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of different. I mean, you did musicals down there.
Mm-hmm.
You did very, what was that? Sex, drugs, rock and roll.
Yeah, Eric Bogosian.
The Bogosian one. Oh
Yeah,
my
you were in
gosh.
that first one.
That was
Sex, Drugs, Rock and Roll.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were in that one. That was great, and I mean that was groundbreaking. I mean,
Yeah,
to be
especially
done in
around
Jefferson
here.
City.
Yeah, we just didn't do stuff.
And
like
certainly during the Rocky Horror Show, when you even have a few people up on High Street doing a little bit of a protest,
Yeah.
That were even doing the show. And of course, that was in '07.
Was it really?
Yeah.
I remember, well, and Scene One's probably the first theater in town to probably use the F word very prolifically in a show.
Quite possibly, yes.
Yeah. Because a lot of shows prior to that just didn't, they were very mainstream shows to do.
Yeah.
We didn't do a lot of but that was one of the neat things that, you'd go and you'd do a show like that had explicit language or explicit situations, circumstances, and you go out and you do that. And even the very first show,
Psycho Beach Party.
Party, that was pretty explicit, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, it was kind of light, but there was a serious subject matter in there.
And the thing that was really surprising was that there was an outpouring of support for the theater in town. Like, there were a lot of people. Like, there were the people that always came to the shows.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming they still do. You still have that same core audience that come out to the shows.
We've got some members and sponsors who've been with us since day one.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was immediately coined as the theater for adults, meaning this is the kids go elsewhere. This is our night. We get to have our date night here at Scene One.
Right.
A lot of adults, they called it that from the get-go.
Yeah. And it's cool because I've had people, and I won't name any names, but I had people come up afterwards and say, "Oh my gosh, we love these shows. We love that they're not, that they're a lot more mature in a lot of ways." And luckily, I got to do a lot of those really mature shows.
Yes.
They were a ton of fun.
Oh yeah. And humorous too. I mean, Scene One, we've done our share of comedies, but dark comedies, with Christopher Durang and David Lindsay Bear, and some of those, have been my favorites.
Mammoth. We did a couple Mammoths.
Oh yeah. Glenn Ross and Speed the Plow.
Yeah. You guys need to do another Mammoth here.
Yeah, we might be due.
Might be.
We just might be.
You definitely need to do one.
What's that?
I said you definitely need to do one.
And that might be the vehicle that might get you up here.
Hey, I'll come back for a Mammoth.
Yeah.
Either that or Guys and Dolls.
Oh boy, Guys and Dolls, yes.
I have been peddling that show for I don't know how many years. I'd love to do it.
Well, and that, you talk about the little theater of Jefferson City, and now I think this might have been when you and Michelle lived away.
Yeah, we moved away when they did this.
But when Rob Krause directed that for the little theater of Jefferson City, I was fortunate to be cast as Nicely. And that, people ask me, and oddly enough, that was 9/11. That was September of 2001.
Really?
2001 was 9/11.
Yeah.
And that happened. And we were going to have a show. And everybody was so, obviously sad, depressed about what had happened. And we were like, do we even have any business having a show? So I don't think I was on the little theater board at that time, but it was decided, we will have a show. We need this. We need a show. I'm pretty sure that was Guys and Dolls that year.
Really?
And so we had the show. And I often think about, pursuing acting professionally. And, I think about the roles I've been fortunate to play and the roles that I've loved playing in Jefferson City. And I say to myself, well, I got that role in Jefferson City, but would I get it in the real world? Not that we're not the real world,
right.
But in the real professional world. Many times it would be no. But Guys and Dolls, Nicely, I always felt was a role that I could get out in the professional world, that I could compete and audition for that and possibly be cast, because it was just a perfect fit for my caricature and my body type and everything like that. And so I
That's
love
one of
that
my
role.
favorite songs.
Yeah. Oh God. And Sit Down, You're Rocking the Boat.
Sit Down, You're Rocking the Boat.
But all of them.
Is that after? Is that at the end of Act 1?
I want to say it's in Act 2.
So it's at the 10 spot. It's right at...
It might be. I can't remember. Isn't that terrible?
It's like right after the intermission then. It's like one of the first songs right after it, right?
I think. But that was a high, and I loved it because, you know, I think about the times, you know, you do so many of these shows, and you learn a lot, you know a lot. But then you're in a show where somebody challenges you. And I think about, you know, being in that musical, Rob Krause is directing, David Gillespie is the musical director. And I also think about the times I've been cast with the Little Theater, and Scott Selner has been the musical director when we did Oliver, which I think might have been the year after Guys and Dolls. It was, you know, done. That was not the first time Little Theater did it, but it was at that time. And to have these musical directors, you know, I'm a singer, but they challenge you. And I love to be challenged. I mean, that takes me back to the acting classes at MU. And one of my favorite Scene 1 experiences, you know, I often talk about my favorite Scene 1 shows, and I have to divide it up between the ones I've directed and the ones I had nothing to do with.
Right.
You know, but just as artistic director, I loved them. But one of my favorite acting experiences was a couple years ago on Capitol Avenue, Scene 1.2, Dan Zager and Jericho Witter co-directed Almost Maine.
Okay.
And I was lucky to be cast in that. And Jericho, you know, you're given, the way that that's written, you're given different scenes. And it just so happened Jericho directed my scenes. But he challenged me as an actor in a way that I had not been challenged in a while. You know, because sometimes people catch me like, that's Mark, he's going to do his thing, whatever. But Jericho challenged me, especially in two of those scenes out of the three. The third one, I say he didn't challenge me as much because it was closer to who Mark is, maybe. But the other two, he challenged me. He gave me stuff, and I was like, what? And I did it. You know, and I succeeded. Like, you know, you're looking at me, and he said, in this one scene, I want you to be Matthew McConaughey. And I'm like, what, me? He's like,
all right.
Exactly. And it was in a scene with Jamie Ware. And he's like, I want you to be, and I'm like, what? I said, that's not how I thought. He said, no, that's, and I had to take that home and think about that. And it worked. I did it. I mean, it created this very interesting character. And in the other scene, what was so great about it, there was just something that wasn't working. And Jericho was watching me, and it was a scene I actually had it was with Kelsey Slaughter. And Tracy even was watching. That's my wife, of course, you know. It's just something wasn't working. And I'm like, I don't feel right. And Jericho and maybe Tracy weighed in on it too. They're like, he's like, I want you to do that scene again. And I want you to be as quiet. You're too loud. He was supposed to be kind of a lost, down on his luck kind of character. He said, you're too loud. You're too expressive. You're too much. You need to be less, quieter. So I did that, and I'm like, can you hear me? And he's like, yes. They're like, yes, we can hear you. And I just delivered it all really soft. And I was done. I'm like, you could hear me? You could hear me? As I step away from them. And they're like, yes, we can hear every word. That's it. And I'm like, I could feel it. It worked now. It's like, that's what it needed. You took your volume down. It's softer. Less is more with that character.
Yeah.
So do that.
Yeah, and you know,
It was
a lot of
great.
that was exercises that, I mean, you guys even showed me back in the day too. It's like,
Yeah.
the one I always remember, and it's along the same lines as when we, Mark and Tracy cast me as George in Of Mice and Men, and Mark played Lenny. It was probably the first night of rehearsal, and I think me and you just rehearsed for a while, just together. First lead part that I'd ever had, first meaty part that I'd ever had. Took a big chance on me to do it once again, and I remember one night Tracy goes, all right, Tommy, here's what I want you to do. Mark, I want you to get on Tommy's back, and Tommy, I want you to carry him
Oh, God, I do
around
remember
the
that.
theater.
Yeah.
And I was like, seriously? And she goes, yeah. And the exercise was,
What weight was I then? I can't remember.
the exercise was you're carrying the weight of Lenny.
Yeah.
And she goes, that's your posture in this. And that's, you know, those exercises are good. It's a,
Oh, yeah.
you know, sometimes they seem stupid, You know, sometimes when you're doing it, like, this is so stupid. This is so stupid. But they really do work.
Yeah, you get something from it.
Yeah.
And that's exercise. And if I may, I love talking about this. Up at, I talk about the acting classes up at MU, and I had acting 1 and acting 2. I didn't stick around long enough to have acting 3 because I came home, like I told you.
You didn't need it.
Well, thank you. But, of course, acting 1, can I talk about my experiences up there? Because I love them. I cherish them forever. In acting 1, my instructor was Jim Miller. And we were doing, he says, okay, it's the beginning of class. Everybody's getting to know. He's pick a monologue, memorize it, and, come. So I can't remember now what monologue I picked. But I did my monologue one day, and he stops me and he goes, wait a minute. He goes, you're nervous. And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, and I know why. I'm like, why? He goes, because you're fat. And I'm like, okay. He's like, you're fat and it bothers you. I'm like, okay, yeah. And the class is just like on the edge of their seat. And he's like, what would you say if I told you I wanted you to do this monologue naked? And I'm like, okay, in the class was Chuck. Chuck was big, muscular MU wrestler who wanted to take some acting classes,
right.
Okay? And I said, naked? I said, well, I'd tell you if I looked like that guy, I'd do it. And he goes, oh, so you're not just fat, but you're vain. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, and then he went into this whole spiel. I feel like your weight is holding you back. You need to embrace who you are 100% and be comfortable. So he was kind of like breaking the ice.
Right.
He was making me comfortable. I got to tell you, there were classmates of mine who got angry at him. Now,
doing that?
Yes, I chose to take what he had to tell me and use it. But the class was divided. There were some of these classmates. One girl dropped the class.
Because of that?
Because he was mean to me. Yeah. They just thought that was uncalled for. I had heard about these kind of acting classes. Well, they're going to tear you apart and,
right.
Take off the layers and stuff like that, whatever. I loved it. I used it. I mean, the man taught me a lot, so much so at the end of the semester, and I got an A in his class, we were performing scenes from Tennessee Williams' 27 Wagons Full of Cotton. And I played the guy, and I was opposite. Her name was Danny. She was my wife, and he's sitting on the porch. It's hot and humid, and he's got a rag, and he's wiping. Well, I unbuttoned my shirt, and because I was hot, I took it off. That was my version of getting naked for my teacher. And he loved it. The class, who stuck with it, loved it. And as soon as the scene was over, I'm like, oh my God. And I went behind a curtain and I hid because it was now Mark. Okay. But I learned from the man, and I was in many of the musicals he directed. Now, acting too really changed my life. Okay. That was the semester. We dove into the script, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Mm-hmm. And the teacher was Richard Klepak, who has since passed away. But the man, once again, he was the kind of teacher, sometimes he would walk in and he'd say, class, I'm not feeling today, you can go home. And some people drop that class because they're like, who is this guy? Whatever. Well, you stuck around long enough, you learned from this man. I mean, the whole semester, we were cast as a character from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I was a George. And, of course, that's the Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton role, from the movie. And we had to memorize 3 scenes. And I remember one time, this is where my life changed in acting too, really changed. Because you're thinking about, you want to do this professionally. You want to improve your craft. We're like doing a scene, and he stops everybody. He goes, wait a minute. And he looks at me specifically. He's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, what are you looking at out there? He's like, you're delivering these lines, and you're looking out there. And he said, what are some beautiful mountains out there you're seeing or something? And I'm like, no. And he goes, okay, all 4 of you, because there's 4 characters. And he said, I want all of you. You know the lines, you've worked on it. When you talk, you either look in the eyes of another character or in your glass, because, you know, they're all drinking.
Right.
They're all drinking and getting drunk. You either look in your glass or you look in the eyes of another character. Nowhere else. Oh, my God. We did that. And you talk about bringing in focus, bringing in reality. I mean, it changed my life.
Yeah.
I had never really been forced to do that. And I tried to incorporate that, obviously, at scene one.
But that was a completely different style of acting than you were
Right.
accustomed to.
Right.
Prior
I mean,
to.
you know, I'd done a lot of proscenium stage. And even with Jim Miller, you know, he directed a lot of what? Musicals, you know. And even now, directing people at scene one, it is a commitment. It is hard to do for me to talk to you and to keep looking at you. People like to stray away and they like to wander.
Yeah.
I'm like, don't. And just like that one time, remember when we did, I've incorporated it a lot, I feel, when we did Sex, Drugs, Rock and Roll. And remember Rich Burge, his monologue.
Yeah.
I said, Rich, you know, he came in, he's like, I'm going to move here. And I said, no. I said, the whole first half of that monologue, you're in the corner and you stay here. That's all you got to do. You just stare at this one spot. Look how powerful that was. How it drew the audience in.
Yeah.
Then later he moved. That focus, I try to teach actors that the longer you stare at something, the longer and more we take you in. You know, and it's not like you're hypnotized, not like a trance. It's just focus. And it's hard. It's hard to learn that.
Well, and you know, it's the same thing as when you're looking around and you're doing all this unnecessary movement sometimes.
Right, and fidgeting.
You're upstaging yourself.
Right.
And you're upstaging your performance
Yeah.
and you're upstaging the script.
Yeah.
In the impact of it. And I'm not a huge proponent of like watching videotapes of yourself.
Oh, me either.
You know, perform. But because we videotaped stuff back in the day so that we could watch them afterwards, that the most beneficial thing that I saw was unnecessary movement.
Yeah.
It's, you know, like Terry Schoonover, he was a huge proponent of happy feet, you know,
Yeah.
stop moving your feet, plant your feet, you know, be still.
Right. Well, and that takes me back, and this is kind of interesting because, you know, Tracy and I, you know, we talk about this, and, you know, I've directed so many shows, and I often think back on, you know, you look back at the shows you've directed, and sometimes I get really hard on myself, really hard on a show. You know, and I'm like, was this show perfect? And I'm like, this show might have been great, it might have been good, but that one night that actor stumbled on that line and that makes it a little less. Does that make sense? I mean, that's real picky.
Yeah.
It might be kind of dumb. But so many of the Scene One shows that I've directed, you know, I go back and look at, and sure, they were good. They were excellent shows, but there might be a little thing. And it's a simple thing like we never did like that costume, but we had to settle, you know, something like that. But I always tell Tracy, the one show that I thought was absolutely flawless was Private Wars. And
If
you
I was
mentioned,
young enough to do that show again.
and you three guys, and you mentioned Terry Schoonover, and that was when Mr. Terry, who likes movement, who likes to get up and move around and be boisterous, I made him sit there. I said, and that's kind of like what Jericho did with me in Almost Me. And I'm like, Terry, you're too much, small, little, be quiet, be soft, and don't move. And that was a challenge for him because he liked to get up and be big, you know, like Shakespeare.
Yeah.
You know, he loves Shakespeare. But that show,
Gately, picture, if you will, an Oregon stream in the spring of the year. Icy waters teeming with salmon.
yes.
Oh, I love that
you
show.
remember that?
I
yeah.
love that show.
It was a great show. It was a great show.
And I really wish at some point, and I thought about it a couple times, I really wish we could have gone back and done the sequel.
Yes, and I know you mentioned that.
That was I read that show, and it was actually a pretty decent little show. It was
The day they shot John Lennon?
day they shot John Lennon. Actually, Silvio and Natwick are in the show.
They're in that one.
Their characters are in that show. Yeah.
I don't think I ever did read it.
Yeah, I think I bought a copy.
I think, and I may still have it.
I think I gave it to you, and it's down in your basement somewhere.
Many people have given me scripts, and they've been told it's in the basement somewhere, and it is. But that does remind me, do you know, and I didn't realize this, and I didn't tell Tracy this yet either, there is a sequel to Red Ryder. I found out Mark Medoff, he wrote that, and there's a book that has Becca's character began with an A. Was it April?
I think it was April.
And Red Ryder, that character, what is his first name? They're in it. They are in it.
Really?
Yeah. And I just discovered this. I saw it in a book the other day. I haven't read it or anything. But it's a book I actually own. I bought it not too long ago in a used bookstore, I think in Columbia. And it's in there. And I can't remember the title. Yeah, I'll have to read Angel. Angel was Becca's character. And I can't think of Red Ryder's name. His character name. Is it Jimmy? No.
No.
I mean, you said his name enough, didn't you? Or no? Your
yeah,
character?
I did, but I can't remember what his name is.
I want to say it began with a J, but...
That show, I think I forgot the lines as soon as the show was over with.
Yeah.
For any of you out there, I know a lot of our audience, you guys are film actors. But the thing to remember is that theater is a completely different beast than film acting. And it is fun in and of itself. It's very hard in and of itself. You're kind of tapping into a completely different part of your brain on a lot of that. The joy that I had from theater, and I still have from theater, and I hope to have even more I think I'm on show 74 now. And I hope to at least do 100.
Yeah.
But theater has been one of the most rewarding. It's been one of the biggest learning experiences in my life. I've been challenged probably the most. If you ever think that theater is not all that, you are completely and utterly wrong. It's probably one of the most challenging and complicated things I've ever done in my life.
I like that. Yeah, that's good. True.
So what is next for Scene 1 now? You got a season laid out now? We do. Well, not completely, but almost. So, actually, we're getting ready to open our 2021-22 season, which I think is our 17th. I think. So next week, actually, opening June the 9th, we have our Tales from the Rough Riders in 2021. And what that is a few years ago, all of our writers, people, playwrights who write for Scene 1, we formed a group, and we decided to call it the Rough Writers, as we all write. Named after, Rough Riders, the whole Teddy Roosevelt thing, and of course our guy on the logo, Theater That's Bully, kind of looks like Teddy Roosevelt. And in November of 2019, we had our first installment of Tales of the Rough Riders, and it encompasses not just short plays, like short attention span theater, but it also welcomes like poetry, prose, music, monologues. It's like a variety. And when we did November, we had all of that. We had a variety. And next week's show, we don't have any original music this time, but we do have short plays, and we have some monologues and some poetry. And sometimes we have a theme. We'll put out themes there for the Rough Riders. And with this being Missouri's bicentennial this year, we did put a theme, the state of Missouri. And we didn't get a ton of submissions, but we got a few. So half of the material that will be at this performance will be dedication to Missouri. It's about Missouri. That's cool.
And things that have to do with Missouri. Actually, all the monologues and poetry had to do with Missouri. The short plays do not. So it's kind of a variety. And then in July, we have a show. Actually, we just got the rights for it. Mary Jo LaCourte will be directing a show called The Cake. And,
they're doing that down in Springfield.
Are they?
Yeah.
And it's based on the real life situation. A young lady is getting married, and she goes to childhood friend, who's like a mother, a mentor to her. And this woman is a baker. She bakes cakes. And this young lady is getting married and wants her to bake the cake. The young lady is marrying another lady.
Right.
And the cake baker doesn't know if she likes that.
Yeah.
She doesn't know if she wants to bake that cake. So that's a very timely situation. I read the script and love it. I love the way it plays out. I love the way both sides of that situation are represented. Then in September, Becca Seaball was going to direct a show called Men Are Dogs in January, but it still got canceled because of COVID in January of 2021. So it will be here in September.
Oh, cool.
November time slot is not confirmed yet, as is the beginning of next year is not. We're still working on like a January show and a March show. But in May of 2022, Jack Renner previously was directing Last of the Red Hot Lovers by Neil Simon, which was supposed to go up in November of 2020. Well, of course, because of COVID, it didn't, and now it's been pushed back to May of 2022. And that is Jack's show. And so that completes our season. Our seasons, we kind of mapped them out to where they kind of go from June to May.
Yeah.
The following year, kind of, or either that or from summer to summer, however it falls. So yeah, that's kind of what we
awesome.
Have going. Yeah. It's a nice variety. And I know we still have to fill in November and January and March, and it'll probably wind up being something original. We've got a lot of original stuff. We just need to decide how we want to label it and put it out there. We'll probably have a short attention span theater in there somewhere.
No, that'd be cool.
And yeah, because the original works are very important. They're very popular. I mean, when we started doing those, you know, people love the idea that they come to see a show at Scene One, and the person who wrote it is 2 seats away. That's cool. You know, that the playwright.
Well, and we've had some really good, like Keith Enlow has done quite a few original shows.
Yes.
Here. Mary Jo has done. Then we have
Mark Miles.
Keenan,
obviously.
So we've had some really good.
Yeah.
And then your stuff, of course.
Yeah, and of course I haven't done as many short attention span plays as some of those other folks.
When are you going to write again?
Well, I'm writing right now a couple of things that aren't complete. We have a theme that we put out there, and of course we put out a couple of themes at a time, and we had some themes, you know, they all got put on the back burner because of COVID. But one theme that we have out there right now is Tall Tales from the Rough Riders. And it is writing things that are inspired by like idioms and metaphors and similes and stuff like that. And I'm actually currently writing one of those.
I'm not sure what any of those are.
Okay.
But yeah.
I don't know how to, I mean, I've looked them up. I don't know how to define them right now either. But it's kind of like one of those is like, if I say, oh, God, Tommy, I went out and bought a new car. It cost me an arm and a leg.
Right.
Obviously, it didn't cost me an arm and a leg. I can't even say it, but it did, you know. Yeah. Those kind of statements like that. So we have people who are writing with those themes. I just got a couple of other things. I'm just kind of, that will be full-length stuff, but they're just in the beginning stages.
That's cool.
You know, what's weird, and other writers have told me this, They thought, and I know some, this probably is not true, but they thought, oh my God, COVID, I'm going to get so much writing done. Well, they didn't. It's like real life inspires writing, and if you're not
interaction,
exactly. Yeah. So if you're all cooped up at home, it didn't get much inspiration. I guess, I don't know.
Well, and I think the other thing too is you probably find out that after you got done, if you wrote something during COVID, everyone had pretty much the same experience. Yeah. Yeah. And so whoever was the first one out the gate to get it out there was like, hey, I got it first. And they were going, yeah, this has been done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. True.
Well, that's cool, man. Well, I want to say thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you.
It means a lot to me. I will always hold, and I will continue to hold a special place in my heart for you, Mark.
Same here. I think I've told you you're like the brother I never had. So
we're like brothers from another mothers.
True. There you go. Yeah. Theater brothers.
I believe it. We are. I love you, brother.
You too. Thank you very much. This has been great. Spilling my guts here.
Let's do something soon.
Like another interview? No.
Yeah. Here, I'll pause this and we'll start all over again.
Okay, yeah. Yes, let's work on that.
Yeah.
That would be great.
I'll have my people talk to your people.
Okay,
and your
sounds
people
good.
Talk to me.
Does that mean Michelle and Tracy have to converse?
That's probably what it is.
Okay, yeah probably.
All right, man. Well, thank you for being on the show.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate it. I love you.
Thank you. You too. Love you very much.
You have been listening to the Bravo Creative Podcast. Analysis of your biometrics have been compiled and calculated. You are now a minuscule part of the collective. Enjoy the rest of your pitiful day.